Thanks for being here, Nick. I am super, super excited about this because of all the guests we have. I think that you have managed to build the largest community of everybody. Can you talk a little bit about your background and about this community that you built? How big is it now, for example?
We've got over 80,000 on the email list at Side Hustle Nation and closing in
Wow.
on 50,000 members in the Side Hustle Nation Facebook group.
Amazing. And so what is Side Hustle Nation? Give us an overview.
This is the web's leading resource on part-time business ideas and creative ways to make extra money. Started kind of as a side project of its own to the original business that I was running.
Right.
It kind of took on, started to see some positive traction slowly at first, but then gaining some speed and gaining some momentum, and it's become the full-time focus for me for the last several years.
So I love, one of the things I love about your story is that it was not overnight success. And far too often as business owners, we hear these stories that makes it sound like somebody came out of nowhere overnight, but you have actually built Side Hustle Nation largely on the side, especially at the beginning, over the course of 8 years now, right?
Yeah, it makes me feel like, what are these original podcasters? But yeah, I started the show in 2013, transitioned from a personal blog that I had been writing that no one ever read. Also in 2013 to, because you start paying attention. Well, what types of blogs and websites end up getting traction? Well, it's the ones that focus on a specific niche. And so my previous blog didn't have any of that. It was rants about current events and pictures from our vacations and, a little bit of business and marketing stuff, because that's what I was doing at the time. But there was no consistent or coherent message, no reason really for people to keep coming back and reading more. And so I thought, okay, I'm gonna try and become the side hustle guy. I'm gonna own this niche. And it took a while, but it felt like I, over time, have established myself in a foothold in that arena.
So in the beginning, when you were first writing all these posts about side hustling, nobody was reading your content, right? I feel this way. I felt this way certainly when I started Jottful. I was writing a post every single week. I was sending it out through our email newsletter, and we had maybe a dozen subscribers to the newsletter, and half of them were related to me. And I know that feeling of it's you're just knocking down trees in the forest and absolutely nobody is hearing the tree fall. Is that what it was like in the beginning? And how did you keep going and persist through that phase?
It was, and it took me just an embarrassingly long amount of time to begin writing with some sort of discoverability intention. Like, okay, you can send it out to your existing email subscribers. And yeah, I like you started with an email list of 11, like entirely friends and family. But then it's like, okay, well, how is this going to bring new people into the fold? And becoming more conscious and aware and intentional about that in the last few years has accelerated the SEO traffic growth. But then the other piece of the pie was the audio content, because I had my blog, I thought of myself as a writer first and foremost, and the podcast was almost an afterthought. But it ended up in that first year, the show grew 3 times faster than the written side of the business did.
Fascinating.
And that was really eye-opening to me. And I would start to show up at conferences and people would be like, oh yeah, you're the side hustle show guy. It's like, nobody read the site. And it's like, oh, maybe I should double down on this audio thing. That seems to be where more people are discovering this content. And I think it's a higher value relationship in a lot of ways. If somebody spends, 30, 40, 50 minutes with you in their earbuds and they do that week after week, they feel like they know you. And I think that's a really cool place to be versus even today, somebody, even if they do find you on Google, that's a miracle in its own right in certain aspect. And then they spend 3 minutes like skimming your post and, maybe they click on to the next thing, maybe not. And I know you're going to cover podcasting in depth next week. So we don't need to beat that down.
So from a content strategy perspective, it sounds like you weren't really doing much differently from your blog post and your podcast in terms of the actual content that you were covering, but it was the platform itself that made you much more discoverable for podcasting than you were for the blog. Do you think that that's because podcasting was just a newer medium at the time and you had less competition than, for example, getting found through search with your blog?
Yeah, I mean, for a new site, it's really difficult to kind of crack the the Google code until you really establish some authority in that space. And so not that new website owners or new bloggers should ignore that. I think you should probably start creating that content to send those signals to Google that this is what my site's about. This is, what I'm an authority in. And if you can send those signals over time, you're going to start to rank, and you got to pick like longer tail keywords to go after in the early days than, battling over, best life insurance rates or some like crazy competitive keyword. It was funny because I was at this rec softball game, and a teammate of mine is like, "Hey man, I found your blog." And I was like, really like, oh, what did I write about? And he's like, "Oh yeah, I was Googling like, how does restaurant.com work?" Which was one of my pre-Side Hustle Nation, very early posts. It was one of these, something that I really enjoyed and still do enjoy, kind of deconstructing these creative business ideas. Where does the money come from? How does this thing work? And even after that moment, and I think that still ranks on the first page of Google, it took me years and years to recognize, like, oh, if you answer people's questions in the content of your post, and you do that better than anybody else who's already out there, then that is likely to rise to the top, and that's likely to rank and start to get you some traffic.
Yeah. Well, what I think is really interesting about what you're talking about, Nick, is there are really two kinds of personal discoveries that you made. One was more technical. What can I do in my content to make it more attractive to people who are using search engines, whether that search engine is Google or it is a podcast platform, right? But what can I do in my content to make it more attractive, which includes baking in keywords, answering people's actual questions, that kind of thing. And that's kind of the technical thing that you can learn by reading books and, watching YouTube videos and just learning from others. But the other piece that was really critical to your business was learning about what to focus on and what needs you should tackle. And ultimately, you started with all of this stuff, right? Producing family content, your sort of side interest in marketing and so forth. And then you eventually discovered side hustles as the place to double down. And I think oftentimes, we can look back and we can say, oh, I would have done this thing differently if I had known better. And I don't mind if, those mistakes are learning mistakes. I just needed to, dig more into the technical stuff. But I really release myself from blame when it's something like finding a niche or like just sort of really starting to understand how you kind of fit in the larger scheme of the world. I might be getting a little bit philosophical, but there are kinds of learning that you can accelerate and a kind of learning you cannot accelerate.
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that, because all of those posts that I wrote were still valuable for me, from the practice of developing a writing habit to learning how WordPress works to just, putting myself out there. I think that was, like finding a way to put down thoughts. It was like a form of journaling in a way, and, coming up with, okay, what's going to resonate, what's not. And I don't know, even though it wasn't, a commercial success, it kind of laid the foundation in a lot of ways.
Yeah. It was a lot of the learning and a lot of the education that laid the foundation for your eventual success.
Yes.
Okay, so talk to us a little bit about the community you've built. What platforms is it on today?
It's primarily on Facebook, as far as the many-to-many interaction, and that was the inspiration for creating it, because it's like, blogging, podcasting, even YouTube to a certain extent. Yeah, there's comments available, but it's very much a broadcast platform where it's one-to-many. What was cool about the Facebook group was that it became, many-to-many. All of a sudden, listeners and readers could interact with each other without my direct involvement in a lot of cases. The brand and me were at the center of that hub, which was a cool place to be, and another touch point. But it was, now all of a sudden, people who had this interest in common could come and hang out. And I was like really nervous to start this, because, like, does the world really need another, entrepreneur Facebook group? It seemed like a crowded space. But I put it out in a survey to the email subscribers, and they said, yeah, that would be cool. We'd come hang out. And now Facebook, because I don't know if it's keyword driven or algorithmically driven, Facebook starts to recommend that group to lots of people, either based on their interests or based on other groups that they're in. And so it has become a kind of top of the funnel discovery platform in its own. And I think Facebook is a top 5 search engine in its own right. And so people search side hustle, people search whatever keyword that your business focuses on. It's another avenue for people to find you.
And when did you launch the Facebook group?
Early 2015. So
you were still early.
Yes.
So I think one thing that's kind of interesting is that part of the key to your success has been to test out new platforms where they were still relatively early, whether it's a podcasting platform or Facebook. It allows you to really get a toehold so you can start to show up in those algorithm search results over time.
And other people are way better at this than me. Like, I don't do a ton on Instagram. I have, I just, started posting a couple, toe dips into the TikTok world. It's like the short form content, even Twitter to a certain extent. It's just, my wheelhouse is a 45-minute podcast episode or a 3,000 word blog post. It's like being, witty and clever and educational in a 30-second burst is a big challenge.
Yeah. So you focus on the Facebook group, you've got the blog, you have the newsletter, and you have the podcast. I assume you're repurposing content across all of them. So maybe what you do in the podcast is the topic that you're going to cover on your blog post and in your newsletter. Are you repurposing content a lot?
Yeah, we've kind of just gone through a few different iterations on strategy there. Today, the primary new content that's getting produced is the podcast. That's something that there's always another Thursday coming around. So that one is kind of set in stone. That's when it's happening. We early on, or kind of like in the middling years, we hid a lot of that content behind an email opt-in. Said, hey, you're out walking the dog, you're at the gym, you're driving in the car, you're not in a great place to take notes. Don't worry, we did it for you. You can go to sidehustlenation.com/whatever, and you can download, we call it like the highlight reel from the episode, with all of the guests' top tips. And that worked really, really well. That grew the email list from around 1,000 people when I started doing that to 3 months within, to 3,000 within 3 months to 6,000 within 6 months. Wow. It was this big inflection point, but what we shifted to lately is for the sake of discoverability and for the sake of user experience, just publishing those highlight reels or those episode summaries just as text, as a blog post on the site, so people can consume audio if they prefer, or they can consume the written version if they prefer.
Awesome. When we were talking before, you mentioned that you experienced a few inflection points along the way. Can you talk a little bit about those inflection points?
Well, starting to treat the podcast as content marketing rather than a business in itself was definitely one. And so trying to turn an anonymous podcast listener. It's hard to give away a free podcast, and the analytics are awful. So it's trying to turn that anonymous listener into a subscriber, where all of a sudden you can email them about the next episode instead of just trusting that they'll find it somehow on their own, or they have subscribed in the app.
Nick, maybe we should back up here a little bit then and say, what is the business model for Side Hustle Nation? Where do you make money?
Yeah, you bet. So 3 legs of the revenue stool, so to speak: sponsorships on the podcast, which took probably about 3 years before that started to come in consistently. So it was a long, slow climb. Affiliate revenue through the blog and email list. And then the third leg of the stool has historically been my own side hustle experiments. And that was the shoe business. So that was, my original side hustle. There was another directory and review platform that I built for outsourcing companies, virtual assistant companies, that I sold in late 2020. That was part of that, but it was my experiments with self-publishing and freelancing and selling stuff on eBay and Amazon. And that was the original hypothesis for the site. Like, I'll be the guinea pig. I had plans to go sign up to be a Lyft driver, and I'll report back on what works, what doesn't. And that's shifted a little bit in more recent years to playing journalist, and I'll point the mic at somebody else who signed up to be a mobile notary person, and ask them, well, how'd you get started? How do you get business for that? How much did it cost? All that stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So first inflection point was really around taking the podcast, just no longer assuming that the podcast is going to be a revenue generator, and turning it into content marketing. What's next?
Second thing is kind of, like we talked about, this accidental discovery of how Google works or how SEO works in a way. And combining that with the realization that the blog reader or somebody who lands on your website isn't necessarily the same person who's tuning into the podcast, realizing you're kind of serving two different audiences, which I never really, I don't know, that kind of challenged an assumption that I had is like, people want to read all of the stuff that I put out. They want to consume everything. It's like, okay, no, but the analytics will show you a different story. Well, okay, 80% of the people coming to the website just found you on Google and, they're in the door. Hopefully you get them to stick around. That's great. If you get them to opt in for something, if you get them to tune into the show, but they're there to just answer their question. It's a much more transactional audience than the podcast listener who's much more entrepreneurial. They're in there for the long haul. And so starting to embrace that and present them with relevant affiliate offers like, hey, go sign up to be an Instacart shopper or something, which is, maybe that's on the podcast listener's radar, but that's probably not high on their list of side hustle ideas. But it's more instant gratification on the blog side and trying to serve that audience, meet them where they're at, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I think of it a little bit as I had this finance professor who said, everybody learns in different ways. So all of the content I'm going to talk about in 3 different ways. I'll do the math, I'll do the theory, and I'll do a case study or an example. And that way you'll pick up one of them, right? It sounds very similar. It's the same audience, same people, same target market. It's just they choose to consume the content a different way.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I've seen from friends of mine in the space who they'll do an audio blog version of it that they throw up on a podcast feed. They'll hire a voiceover person to try and produce the video of it. And then they'll, break it up into little snippets for Instagram reels and everything. It's a lot of work. And I would probably say, focus on maybe your home base to start with. And then one ancillary platform. You think like hub and spoke model, like, okay, well, where can I go find my target customers? Maybe it's LinkedIn, maybe it's TikTok, maybe it's YouTube, but being intentional and focusing on one at a time before you overwhelm yourself.
Yes, absolutely. We're big fans of that here. Any other inflection points, Nick?
Those were probably the main things. The focus on getting Google traffic has been a really important one in the last couple of years, probably 3 or 4 years now, and recognizing that traffic has value, where before I didn't really pay much attention to the traffic that was coming in. And it was like, cool, I got visitors, but like, what was I doing with them? Not a lot. Didn't have a great system for trying to capture emails, for trying to present relevant affiliate offers. It was just, again, creating content for the sake of content. Early on, it's like, got to have a new post because it's Monday. Like, no, don't post unless you have something relevant to share.
Yeah. Okay. So tell me, how did you learn all of this? How did you learn, what offers you could provide your Google visitors, for example? Did you hire marketers to help you out? Did you go deep into reading in on these topics? How did you figure this out?
So some of the most eye-opening revelations have come just from hanging out with peers at conferences. And instead of being real like heads down like I was for a lot of years, just focusing on my own stuff, you start to look up and look around and say, well, how's everybody else making money in this space?
Yeah.
Oh, that's really interesting. These guys rank really well for these keywords. And, the top 5 posts all mention, these same handful of things like, oh, I bet they're making money on that, and then you meet the owners of these sites and it's, oh yeah, I'm an affiliate for so-and-so. And like, okay, if you what's like the, even the blind squirrel finds a nut every now and again.
Yeah.
It took a long time to find that nut and just, pay attention to what's working for other people. And that's been, responsible for some good revenue jumps as well.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. That's so much of what we try to do here is expose business owners to other business owners who have figured some of this stuff out. Like you, congratulations, Nick, have figured some of this stuff out and help them understand how they could follow the same path. This has been really great. If there's one regret that you have, if there's something you wish you had learned faster or something you wish you had dug in on, earlier, for example, what would that be?
Oh, I feel like I could really accelerate the learning curve, if I had to go back and do it over again. On the podcast side, podcasts tend to grow, word of mouth.
I didn't know that. I assumed that they grew a lot through search on the platform.
I feel like search and discovery for podcasting is kind of a weak point, kind of a challenging point. So search and discovery, or rather word of mouth, and getting on other podcasts. So it's something that I never proactively did, probably because I wasn't, really confident in myself and what I had to put out there early on. But I see shows growing a lot faster by, tapping into other audiences early on. And then on the written side, I created a lot of like these philosophical posts, like, 5 lessons I learned from cold calling, or, on momentum, and it's like these 300-word posts. Like, well, you're not going to rank for momentum. And it was stuff that nobody was really searching for. So it was like relationship building content for the existing subscribers, which there's a place for that. But, spent a lot of time creating that stuff that just, a friend put it to me this way, like, if this isn't going to get you new business in some way, then why are you doing it? And it was a lot of this, dedication to the publishing calendar, but you can kind of throw that out the window.
Yeah. I think you have to constantly reevaluate that publishing calendar and decide whether or not you're still placing the right bets. Absolutely.
Well, that's a wrap. If you enjoyed this episode of Marketing Made Easy, please subscribe to Jottful's YouTube channel. That's JOTTFUL. That way, you'll never miss an episode. We'll meet you on the next one.